Hello and welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. It's episode 260. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the man himself, Mr. Mark Pearson-Freeland. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Mike. Good morning, subscribers, listeners, viewers, and everybody tuning in for a little bit more action of the Moonshots Podcast. And Mike, boy, oh boy, I'm excited to get into today's episode. How are you feeling about this particular subject matter as well as this particular author we're diving into today?
Mark, I can only tell you that I am feeling resourceful, virtuous, maybe a little stoic.
Ooh, perfect. Well, you know what's lucky, Mike? I'm also feeling the exact same way. And because of that, we are going to dive into one of the stoic individuals who's really dominating our contemporary life nowadays, and that's Mr. Ryan Holiday. Prolific on YouTube and even more prolific in the bestseller lists. Today, Mike, we're diving into his most recent book, Right Thing, Right Now, which, for those who have been following our deep dives, I suppose you could say, into Ryan Holiday on the Moonshots Podcast, this one's all about the concept of justice. Now, I'm not going to give away too much at this early stage, Mike, but I think the excitement that I found with leaning back into Ryan Holiday as well as this book is the concepts of self-discipline, integrity, and basically just living a really virtuous, positive, and impactful life.
Yes. These things are important because I think we're so distracted by things outside, right? We're distracted by what we see in ridiculous presidential debates, what we see in some of our leaders. And I think it's really important to position the word justice in this context, as Ryan Holiday writes about it. And that is a move towards how you, me, our members and our listeners, how we can do the right thing right now. And I think this is a really powerful book for us to share with our members because at the heart of it, I think is the greatest story of being self-empowered. In a world which is a bit bananas, you can act with integrity, you can do the right thing. And so if you're feeling a bit frustrated with the world around you, and particularly with things that you don't control, well, the great news is this book and this episode will give us all the evidence, all the clues, tips, habits, mindsets to take on how we can do things so we can do the right thing right now. Mark, I'm really pumped up. So I want to do the right thing right now. Where do we start?
Well, I'm going to take a little bit of a leaf out of your book and introduction there, Mike, by taking control myself. We're going to kick off straight into this idea of justice. We're going to hear from Ryan Holiday introduce us to the word, but also help us understand and appreciate how opportunities can help us to go out and do the right thing.
Yeah, it's an ancient philosophy that's built around this idea that we don't control what happens, we control how we respond to what happens. And so the Stoics say that big, small, good, bad, we always have this opportunity to practice one of the virtues: courage, self-discipline, justice, and wisdom.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking about the climate right now, and I feel like everywhere you look, people are not practicing that, what you're describing.
Yes.
So how do you get that back in people's psyche? Where has that gone?
Yeah, the problem is when we hear this word justice, we think about what's going wrong in the world. We think really big picture instead of thinking about what we control. That's what Stoicism is about. What's up to you and focusing there. And so I think if we stop thinking of justice as something like we get from a judge or a jury from the legal system, but as something we do, we see justice as a verb, not a noun. That's how we do. We want to be the change we want to see in the world because that's something we actually affect.
One thing I love about Stoicism is this idea that, like when I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and things like that, years ago, when I realized, and I think the average human forgets, that we control how we frame something. When life throws us a curveball, we don't have to just accept it for what it is. We can make a choice in the moment to how we sort of frame it. And that's part of what you talk about in a lot of your books.
Well, there's something incredible about the Emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius, 2,000 years ago, writing in this little journal that survives to us as Meditations, talking about his anxiety and what he's worried about. And then also telling himself, hey, look, you got to be a good person. You got to work for other people. You got to be honest. You got to be decent. So this is a really timeless thing. We're all we know what we should be. And then the struggle is to get there in our day-to-day behavior.
We're talking about good values, good character. Is that something, like I'm thinking about you, were you raised with these kinds of values, or is this something that you learned through all the research and all the readings?
It's both. You hear these things from your parents, you hear these things in church, you hear these things from the great stories of history, and you see it there in the pages of philosophy. And then you got to figure out, well, which of these work for me?
Yeah.
And then most importantly, how do I apply this in my life?
So timelessness, right?
Yeah.
What is really important to remind ourselves is that the work on which, the foundations on which Ryan Holiday does his work is the great Stoics. And we're talking about ancient philosophers of several thousand years ago, right? Now, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's what's really cool. What he does is he kind of drags them a few thousand years forward into today, and he forces us to think about how we want to live. And he struck on some key ideas. But I think the first point that we need to make is if these ideas can stand up to 2,000 years of human review, not just Ryan Holiday's, there's got to be something here. And the beauty is it comes without any flavor of religion, right? So by jumping into Stoicism, you're not like committing to heading towards the Vatican, or you're not practicing the Ramadan. No, you're practicing time-tested values, timeless values that are about being a good person. So my logic here, Mark, is if they've survived this long and they are still so relevant, literally this book that we are studying together with our members and our listeners and viewers, this book is a #1 on the New York Times bestselling list today.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It's, again, like you say, Mike, it's totally timeless. And I think the reason why it is captured, in fact, I've got my copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations right here. I found it, I dug around, and it's one I've owned for maybe 20 years, perhaps. But getting into it again more recently, particularly with the lens of leaning into today's show, as well as our recent master series on living virtuously, reminded me that it is something that captures your attention every day if you allow it to.
Yes.
And you're right. Isn't it amazing that 2,000 years later, these concepts are still at the top of the best-selling list, not only now in ancient Rome, but globally. And I think that's because of that key insight that Ryan just called out. Be the change you want in the world.
Oh.
What an amazing empowerment piece, to bear in mind as you go out and live your day. It's very, very easy, as we've all experienced, to go out, live your life, and allow moments, perhaps unjust moments, to kind of influence how you feel,
right,
how you behave, how you talk about things with other people. It's very, very easy for that to happen, isn't it? But what a great call out again from Ryan Holiday, that it's up to you, it's up to me, how we want to be, how we want to be behaving each and every day. It's up to us.
Now, I just think of it simply as we've got sort of a finite amount of energy in each of us, right? Do you want to give that to feeling irate, frustrated, or disappointed about things you don't control? Or would you like to route that towards things you do control? Great example for me is I have this really strong conviction, is it completely logical, that I shouldn't make a mess in the city, the environment in which I'm living, right? So to me, it makes total sense to take care that we're just caretakers of the planet, right? I, therefore, could be irate about coal mines. I could be the burning of fossil fuels. I could, go to protests or whatever. But my choice is like, you know what? I'll invest thousands and thousands of dollars and put 35 solar panels on my roof, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do, right? I'm the guy that separates all of his food scraps to go in a very specific thing. Sometimes a bit stinky, but hey, I'm prepared to do it. If you looked at me, you'd never know that I had this conviction. I did my darndest to do the economics of making an electronic vehicle work. It doesn't work for us. So as a family, we're 3 people that drive. We only have one vehicle, and I love nothing more than going with the wife into the city on, heaven forbid, public transport.
Wow.
So I guess these are choices that become very easy for me to make, so I can be the change that I want. Like if every Australian family went for 1 car instead of 2, if every family caught the train once a week or the bus once a week, and these are all decisions that we can make. So this to me is the turn. You focus on the things you can do, and the beauty is you're not wasting your energy worrying or getting irate about things you don't control. But if you are the change you want to see in the world, I believe this is in some small way not only good karma, but I think it's contagious, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. The sentiments of taking care of the climate, investing your money sensibly in causes and areas that you believe do positively impact whatever that cause might be. It's a classic cause and effect situation, isn't it? And that reminds me that we are not only in control of what we do, but also how we view others when they do or do not do it. So, for example, a smaller situation in a day-to-day life with regards to behaving in a positive way might be to hold open the door for other people. Something I learned, as a child, and something that I still maintain trying to do right here, right now at this age. But there would be opportunities for me to be irate with other people when they don't do it back to me.
Right.
For example, if I'm holding open the door and somebody walks through but doesn't say thank you, or alternatively, when I'm trying to get through the door and maybe I've got my hands full and somebody doesn't hold open the door for me, it'll be very easy to, point the finger and say, hey, I do this all the time. I won't bother doing it anymore because nobody does it for me. That's the wrong attitude, isn't it?
Right.
Instead, it's up to me. I can choose to hold open the door. I can choose to not let it be a problem when somebody else doesn't do it for me. And similarly to your example there, Mike, it's something that you can control. When it's a passionate cause that you want to see, it can be contagious. It can be, for example, you're talking about climate and investing and making sensible purchases, but also using public transport. The good news is I'm sure there's going to be a load of listeners today where that penny sort of drops and they think, oh yeah, you know what? That does make sense. I could probably do a little bit of research as well. It's all about having the communication and the behavior in place to kind of inspire others, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it is contagious. Positivity and change is contagious if you are willing to be open to the idea that your life can change as well.
Which is really the catch with all of this. That's very much the reason that we did the Living Virtuous Master Series and why we study these books, because, when you think about it, any practicing religion will often congregate once a week to look at their holy word. So if you think about it, like as humans, we're rather imperfect things, and we need to be reminded of how to actually live with virtue and to do the right thing. And I think this is something that so easily falls out of our habit system. Just like we learned with happiness, you can't just have the intention of wanting to be happy. You need to work on it. You can't just want six-pack abs, you got to work on it. And the same thing, I believe, is to feel good at the end of the day, to know that whatever the outcome was, you did the right thing. You can't leave it to chance. You have to be prepared, because there's that whole saying, like, failure to prepare is preparing to fail, right? And I think that is very strong in this theme here. So I think what we're opening up with this episode and this first idea from the book is a chance to go, okay, let's put in the necessary training during the week, so when we play on the weekend in the game of life, that we're at our best. And I think people who lead by example, they, number one, they get a Ryan Holiday book, and number two, they become a member of the Moonshots Podcast.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I think those individuals that we know, Mike, who are joining us on the Moonshots family are certainly, I think, living that advice. They are looking to try and find opportunities to go out and maybe practice their best selves and practice a virtuous life. So without further ado, as always, let me bring out the trumpet that celebrates those individuals, and welcome in Bob, Niles, iTrip, Dietmar, Marjan, Connor, Lisa, and Sid, Mr. Bonjour, Paul, Berg, Kalman, Joe, Christian, Samuel, and Barbara, Deborah, Lasse, Steve, Craig, Ravi, Yvette, Raul, and Nikawada, Ingram, Dirk, Venkata, Marco, Jet, Roger, Stefan, Raw, Nimalen, James, Diana, Christoph, Denise, Laura, Smitty, Corey, Daniela, and Mike. Annual members, high fives to you guys. In fact, many of you are well beyond that annual membership already. As usual, hot on those heels are more members that are joining us each week, including Antonio, Zachary, Austin, and Fred, Ola, Andy, Diana, Margie, Ron, Casper, and Fabian. Thank you so much, guys, for not only joining us week in, week out, joining us as we're learning and improving ourselves and staying curious with a growth mindset, you could say, but also for supporting the Moonshots podcast.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, we had our first member from China, and they entered the Chinese characters. So if this is you, if you can just tell us how your Western name sounds, because I think Mark is quite the linguist. He might be able to say your name. I certainly couldn't, but we really do welcome you and encourage you to send us your Western name so we can put you on the honor list for our members. And to the rest of the members, we are very grateful for your support, because this helps us pull together this show to study the works of people like Ryan Holiday, and that all helps us live the very best life that we can live. And we are only just getting started on that mission in this show, because we've kind of figured out, with that first clip that, this is a choice to follow this path. It's not only a choice, but it's an active choice. You have to keep working on it. And now we've got some thinking from Ryan Holiday, which is really going to set us on the path of the work that we need to do to make this a reality, how we can do the right thing right now. So, Mark, why don't you let loose the second clip of this special Ryan Holiday show?
This is a clip for those who are sitting at home wondering, or they're commuting around wondering, okay, well, this is quite tough for me to begin. Where do I get started? Well, the first bit of good news for all of us is, as Ryan Holiday calls out, no one is born a saint. It's something you can earn.
Nobody's born a saint. Even the people that we admire so much, that we look up to, they weren't born that way. They became that way. And they're flawed and contain within them all the flaws that we contain within us. There's a story about Gandhi. He steals some money from his brother when he's a kid. And he's overwhelmed with guilt and shame. And he finally confesses to his father about it. His father was then sort of on his deathbed. And he writes this horrible letter where he's whipping himself and piling on himself about it. And his father sort of grabs the letter. He sits up in bed and he reads it. And when he finishes, he just tears it apart. And this moment of forgiveness, of grace, it shapes Gandhi for the rest of his life. He would still be struggling with guilt and shame over other things that he'd done. But this moment of his father forgiving him, it shapes him. And I think he never forgets the humanness of both his father and himself in that moment. He would say, I'm not a saint trying to be a politician. He said, I'm a politician trying to be a saint. The point is, it's about the striving to be better than we are that makes us great. When you see someone who's cool under pressure, when you see someone who's generous, when you see someone who forgives, when you see someone who doesn't have a big ego, don't tell yourself, oh, they're just naturally better than me. They were born that way. That's letting yourself off the hook, and it's also unfair to them because it's ignoring all the work that goes into it, how they're striving to be that way. If you take Marcus Aurelius as this perfectly formed philosopher, king, God among men, you're missing that he was writing in Meditations. The purpose of him writing Meditations was to be the person he was aspiring to be. It was an act of, he was challenging himself, he was chiding himself, he was working on himself. And so we don't want to see these people as being born that way because they were working at it. And there was people in their life, whether it's Gandhi's father, or for Marcus, it's Antoninus, or his philosophy teacher, Rusticus, who shaped and inspired and helped him become who he was meant to be. And the same is true for us.
Oh boy, this kind of brings me full circle to growth mindset. So Carol Dweck, who is the author of the book and did a lot of really profound studies on having a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. This is where we see like this perfect intersection between Stoicism, 2,000 years old, and some growth mindset, which is a more recent thing. And, if you want to look at a purveyor of growth mindset, look no further than Satya Nadella at Microsoft. Very influential for how he raised his family and how he, really built a second chapter of Microsoft. My point here is what jumps out is the word striving to be better, working on it. And I think you are not born good or bad. You have to strive to work to be a good person. Like you need to strive and work on being happy. It's not just something that comes. And it's this striving, this brings me to ideas we've heard on the show many times, compound effect. 1% better every day. If you can just shift the needle a little bit every day and you do it continuously every day. And I think that the biggest crossroads I see here is with the thinking of David Goggins. He figured out, particularly when he had done the second book, he's like, oh my gosh, like I literally have to find discomfort and challenge every single day. Otherwise I'm going backwards. And this is kind of the same idea, but just from a different perspective. We must strive to be doing the right thing. We can't leave it to chance. And it's this daily thing. And boy, Mark, I'm going to set this one up for you. He mentioned as a mechanism, journaling as a way to do this. What did you think?
I know. Look, you're totally right. Journaling as a key way of keeping yourself on track. This idea of the compound interest, it is something, whether it's happiness, whether it's positive thinking, whether it's a growth mindset, is something that you can track and you can hold yourself accountable. I think accountability is probably the key word there. But when I combine that with what we just heard from Ryan Holiday regarding, no one's born a saint, is this idea of reassurance. This strive to being better is great for me to hear because then I know everybody's put in that effort. Again, as Ryan Holiday said, Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations. We're still talking about it 2,000 years ago. Well, it wasn't something that he naturally came out, was born and, produced a bit of work. He was working on it all of his life. And that's reassuring, I think, to us as well as all of our Moonshots listeners and everybody else, in that as long as we stay diligent and maybe use something like journaling to help us stay accountable, we can all strive to be better, as you pointed out. At the same time, what I also really like is not only this angle of reassurance, but it's also motivating. It's nice to hear that people have always worked at trying to get themselves better. They've always had that drive to go out and maybe become, maybe not a saint. I'm not sure whether I'll become a saint in my life, but at least in the eyes of maybe others, I might get to a point where I have positively impacted them through my drive and through my ability to strive to be good. Now, for me, that is the biggest motivator, because that will then positively impact other people. That will help me feel good about the life that I've lived. And it then reassures the sort of this concept of legacy, as we'll probably come on to talk about later in the show, because you're positively leaving behind a sort of cookie trail, as it were, like a fairy tale, I suppose, of positive moments throughout your life that kind of keep other people inspired, keep other people feeling maybe even happy, or maybe even motivated to go out and do their own work on themselves.
Yeah. So let's play a little game here. Let's imagine we were going to journal on doing the right thing. Let's see how crazy, simple and easy we can make it. I'm going to read to you a couple of prompts. And let you tell me if you were going to have to write a journal right now about doing the right thing. I'm going to throw a few at you. You can tell me which one you really like and why. Okay. So here are some journal prompts to help reflect on doing the right thing. Okay. Number 1, what does doing the right thing mean to you personally? And how do you determine what is right in various situations? Think of a time when you did the right thing, even though it was difficult. What motivated you? How did you feel afterward? Who or what has influenced your sense of right and wrong the most? How do these influences align with your personal values? So I got a whole list of them here, but let's get into it. Which of those makes you go, ooh, I could write about that?
I think the one that stands out to me straight away was the second one. So think of a time where it was positive and reflect on it. I think that, based on what we've just been talking about, this idea of reflection, this idea of compound interest stands out to me, because this could be something very, very small, or it could be something enormous. If we go down the small route, let's say I'm sitting here, Mike, we wrap podcast recording, we've given a high five to all of our members, and now I'm going to sit down and think, okay, well, what's been really good? I might sit here and think of a time that's positively impacted me, as maybe one of our members writing in with something, a really positive sentiment. Hey, thanks so much, Mike and Mark and the Moonshots family, for pulling out this insight. Something as small a behavior that somebody else has done has such a positive impact on me, much like a butterfly effect, that I am compelled to then put in the effort again tomorrow or next week. Likewise, maybe it's, again, going back to my sentiment earlier, maybe somebody holds open the door, maybe somebody smiles, maybe somebody even does something that's not with me, maybe somebody thanks the bus driver or holds the door open for somebody else, and I see it. And I think, oh, there is a positive bit of humanity, or there is an element of people caring for each other. That's the sort of thing that I would reflect on, Mike, and think, you know what, that's such a positive experience that I've witnessed, whether I'm involved or not. That will help me kind of put a smile on my face.
Yes.
Maybe I'll share that story with someone else and it'll put a smile on their face. That, I think, is a demonstration in my mind of how to look at any opportunity in the day or any behavior in the day and see it perhaps as a positive influence and how I'm going to go out and feel. But Mike, that's for me. How do you react when you hear those journal prompts?
Oh, look, I like those, but I'm totally cheating. I'm looking down the list and picking another one just to spice it up a bit. I like this one. Consequences of inaction. Write about a situation where you didn't take action, even though you felt you should have.
That's a challenge. That's confronting, isn't it? We're getting into the uncomfortable spaces now, aren't we?
Okay. But here's why I like this. Because you need to read books like this and do exercises like this, because it's not in our nature to go there, right?
No.
And this makes me think of some one time recently, I had been invited to an event and I had said in advance I wasn't able to make it. And I know the folks would really have liked me to be a part of it, but I said, when I saw them the following time, I apologized for not being there. But in doing so, I also realized I should have maybe said that earlier and quicker. The point being is, like, those things, you can go around in your head on those, but if you journal about them, when the moment strikes, you can be more decisive and feel better about acting in the way you want to act, right? And everything gets, messy in life. Like, Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. But this is why I think these conversations matter, is to really program yourself to act in the very best way you can. And sometimes, like, what's the difference between saying, I'm sorry, 2 weeks, whatever, but there is a difference in the end.
Yeah. And you're totally right. And it's that ability to journal helps you process.
Yeah.
I think, when there have been moments when I've looked back and similarly to yourself, maybe thought that I should have done something quicker. Maybe I should have apologized a little bit sooner, or maybe I should have said thank you sooner. When you write it down and compartmentalize maybe how you're feeling about it, that becomes more evident quicker. Yeah. And you realize that was an opportunity to grow. That was an opportunity for me to learn something from this discomfort I'm sort of feeling inside.
Yeah, right.
Or this nagging feeling in my head. I wonder what that is. Let's explore it. And then by doing so, you realize I should have said thank you. That small behavior would have had a positive impact in the long run. And
I've got one more for you, Mark.
Yeah.
This one, this is to go full circle. What are some common challenges or temptations that make it difficult to do the right thing? And here's the kicker. How can you prepare yourself to face these obstacles? So what you're doing there is getting into a fairly sophisticated journaling approach where you've been able to identify and acknowledge, hey, I struggle with these things. But then the prompt goes, well, how are you going to prepare for these in the future? Let's say you struggle with some social interactions or whatever, or if people are presenting options to you that you know that are not right, but you don't really want to go, you don't want that confrontation or whatever it is. If you journal about them before they happen, that courage to journal on them and to think about how you would act, you are literally preparing yourself to act better in the future, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I mean, we've really picked up on this thought of little idea, this hint that Ryan Holiday left us on journaling. But I think this is where we can go right at it about doing the right thing right now. And this is totally within our control. We've all got a pen and paper. We've all got a laptop to write notes on. You can literally press pause on the podcast and get straight after it. That is your choice.
Big time. And I think the only build I can do there, Mike, is when what I've got into a habit of with my Kindle, but also with, paperbacks, for example, the meditations I've got here, is when I find something that inspires me. So outside maybe a conversation that you and I have had or a situation that I've run into during my day, if I find something that's particularly captures my attention, maybe it jars with me or maybe it incites an idea, I'll mark it in the column or I'll highlight it on my Kindle. And that then allows me to come back to it later and journal or reflect or think about it again. And that for me is a great assistance as well in trying to expand, I think, my exposure to things in the world, but also spark that curiosity with how I might react when that certain situation comes around.
Yeah. Now, what's so great about the clips that you've gathered together is, we've already covered this, idea of being the change that you want in the world. And it's all about this daily striving to be better. But we've actually got now a clip where we actually see the author Ryan Holiday relating doing the right thing as a challenge for himself. And it's a great story. So why don't you unleash it on us, Mark?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. We're going to hear now from Ryan Holiday putting himself in the driving seat. If we hear the idea of living a good life and making decisions, much like we've discussed so far, based on what we want the world to be, we've obviously got to live it. So Ryan Holiday here in this next clip, as he speaks at ACL Live, actually demonstrates how he is doing the right thing right now.
So this idea of what's legal, right? What we're obligated to do is the minimum. A couple years ago, I bought the rights from my publisher for Mark Aurelius' Meditations. It's this book that changed my life, and I wanted to publish a premium edition that could really stand the test of time. So I bought the rights to Meditations, which I did this cool edition of. I bought even the rights to my book, The Daily Stoic, and I put out these really cool editions. I found this company. They were partially based in Texas. They're a Bible manufacturer, and they did their manufacturing in Belarus, where they'd been in business for many, many years. And we had this great deal going. The books looked great. They worked great. They sold great. And then a couple years ago, sadly almost a year and a half now, right, there was some trouble in the region, let's say. And there's a reason, it turns out, that Belarus, where the books were manufactured, has been complicit in Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It's because Kyiv and this river here is how Belarus accesses the Black Sea. Otherwise, it is a totally landlocked nation. So the reason that Lukashenko is collaborating with Putin is because he wants this, right? This territory right here. He wants to carve out a little bit of Ukraine so he can have access to the Black Sea. Now, my handful of books I'm publishing here have very little to do with this geopolitical issue. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I had to then make a decision. There are some sanctions on the nation of Belarus, not as many as Russia. I checked with my lawyer, I checked with people I know. There's nothing legally wrong with me continuing to manufacture here, contributing to this economy, right? Running stuff through this active war zone, but it didn't feel right. And so I said, you know what, why don't we find a manufacturer that we're a little more comfortable with? We'd already decided not to work in China. That's why we went to this company in the first place, even though it would have been cheaper there. But let's find someone else. And we found someone in England, also a great family business. They do great work. It's almost 3 times as expensive per book to manufacture them here, right? And so on paper, of course, I would rather not do business with Belarus. But when I'm thinking about a different kind of paper, maybe my opinion changes a little bit, right? I love this line that it's not a principle unless it costs you. It's not a principle unless it costs you money, specifically sometimes. So when we think about what we're allowed to do, when we think about what everyone else is doing, and then we have to go, well, what can I sleep with at night? What do I think? What do I want on my conscience? What am I going to be able to tell my kids? I think about this decision a few years ago, almost 10 years ago now, that CVS decides to stop carrying cigarettes. People thought, oh, this will cost them a couple of $1 billion and it won't matter, right? Because people will just buy the cigarettes elsewhere. In fact, it does cost CVS billions of dollars, but they find overall, across the nation, smoking goes down, period. One vendor deciding not to stock a product that is not good for you, that nobody thinks people should be doing, even the people that smoke. CVS makes this decision, costs them a lot, but it gains the world a lot.
Ooh, there's some nice stuff there. I mean, principles cost you, how you sleep at night. And that distinction, just because it's not illegal, right? And we often hide behind, well, I'm not breaking any laws, as if, hey, I found a loophole, so it's okay. I think this idea that you want to be able to sleep well at night, and I think, we mentioned journaling as one thing. I think the transparencies by which companies choose to operate is another way that they can hold themselves accountable. I think that in the end of the day, Ryan Holiday is never going to be on his deathbed saying, oh, damn, I paid 3 times as much for printing the new books in England. Like, that was the gravest mistake. No, he's going to be like, I feel good that I did the right thing. I could sleep at night, and that's what matters most. And I think sometimes in our rush, we fail to think about how do we want to sleep at night? And again, a little bit this loop of that I've mentioned before, which is, legacy and how do you want to be remembered? These are such powerful ways to frame your actions in the moment, to do the right thing right now. Another couple of good ones is imagine if everything you did today was on the cover of tomorrow's newspaper.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan. Do you remember the Joe Rogan one?
Imagine there's a documentary crew following around.
Yeah.
Very popular.
Yeah. So these are just little tips and tricks that can help you get to terms with what feels right. Because, of course, it is a bit of a thing. He technically could still print with the company in Belarus, right? But he chose not to. And those ones they're all up here, right? It's just you going back and forth. But being able to say, hang on, like, I want to sleep at night. Hang on. What would my grandma say? If this was on the newspaper, what would people think of me? These are just little techniques to force yourself into that clarity, because sometimes it becomes hard. So whether it's journaling or using some of those exercises, this is, I think, core to feeling good when you get into your pajamas, you've got your hot water bottle, you've got your favorite book, you're getting ready to wrap the day up, if you want to feel good about going to bed, I think those are some of the things you can do. Journal on it. Ask yourself, if everyone saw what I was doing on a documentary, how would I feel? I think these force you into understanding the consequences of your behavior.
Big time. It very much reminds me, Mike, of Daniel Pink's The Power of Regret. You know, he did a huge study into Americans and what they essentially feel, I suppose, on their deathbed. And I remember, and I'm looking at some of the notes we took back when we did the show on Moonshots Podcast, if only I'd done the right thing was one of the key regrets that a lot of people had, specifically in the column of morality and this idea of goodness, which speaks, I think, exactly to where you're going with this, and obviously what Ryan Holiday is talking about here. If we don't want to get to, you know, closing time and thinking, if only I'd been a little bit nicer, maybe I'd held that door open, or maybe I'd not benefited or profited from a certain situation because it was detrimental to others. By, I think, forcing ourselves to look ahead and wonder about, as you were just saying then, legacy, what other people will remember us for, how we are behaving to others, and what, if we all interact with people that we may never see again, bus drivers, people on the street, they might remember us as, you know, being unpleasant, regardless of whether they know us or not. That's still a lasting impact.
Yeah.
And what I think, as we were talking about prior to the show, is this all stems, I think, from the idea of the circle of control.
Yeah.
What is it in my day-to-day life that I can control? And actually, it is that outward behavior. And it is, going back to your example earlier, what I might be able to do for the climate. Maybe it's purchasing fewer cars, maybe it's installing solar panels, but it's something up to me.
Yes.
And I think that benefit when you get later in life is then you can look back and say, you know what, I did a bloody good job. I tried hard.
Exactly. And, you know, look, there's something else that's within your control. And that is, like, if you're really interested in the work of Ryan Holiday, there is one destination on the internet, Mark, that I believe has a back catalogue of great studies of his work.
Yes, I don't think it was in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, unfortunately. I've had a look and it wasn't quite there yet, but I'm sure if he was around nowadays, he'd probably recommend it too. And that is www.moonshots.io, where you can get translations, or sorry, I should say transcriptions for all of our shows. You can get into a huge back catalogue of now, Mike, 260 episodes of the weekly show, as well as 35 episodes of the Master Series, which obviously only our members can access, just for the cost of a cup of coffee per week, which seems pretty good. And conveniently enough, moonshots.io has the destination of where people can go out and join exactly on the homepage. So pop along to moonshots.io if you want to lean into the work of Daniel Pink, David Goggins, or topic of today's, Ryan Holiday.
Yes, indeed. But we aren't quite done yet. We need one more thought, Mark. Have you got one thing to get us across the line of doing the right thing right now?
The good news, Mike, is we do. Okay. We have a great closing clip coming up for us now. Ryan Holiday is a fantastic narrative individual who utilizes a lot of historical figures in bringing to life some of the work from our ancient Stoic cousins, let's call them. So in this final clip, we're going to hear about a story of Ulysses S. Grant accepting life without arrogance. And Mike, the lesson for us today is all about knowing how to let it go.
There's this amazing story about Ulysses S. Grant. You know, he goes to West Point as a young man. He's this promising young military officer. He serves honorably in the Mexican-American War. But then something goes wrong. Maybe it's the drink, maybe it's he hates the army, but he basically ends up working for his dad, selling firewood by the side of the road. This is a big fall, from West Point to selling firewood by the side of the road. And one of his old friends from West Point comes by one day, who's still in the army, well on his way, moving his way up through the ranks. And he's ashamed to see his friend doing this. And he says, "Good God, Grant, what are you doing?" And Ulysses S. Grant just looks at him and he says, "I'm solving the problem of poverty." Meaning that Grant doesn't care that he's doing a so-called menial job or that it's a humiliating occupation. All he cares about is that he's providing for his family, he's doing a good job, and he doesn't think that this says anything about him as a person. He knows that it doesn't say anything about him as a person. There's this great line from Marcus Aurelius. He says, to accept it without arrogance, to let it go. It's crazy to think that just a few years later, Grant would be the head of an enormous army, and a few years after that, he'd be the president of the United States. But for the Stoic, there's this idea that comes from Marcus Aurelius. He says, to accept it without arrogance, to let it go with indifference. Meaning, you don't let the lowly position change who you are, and you don't let the high position change who you are either. None of it goes to your head. You know, none of it says anything about you as a person, because you know who you are as a person, and that's what really matters.
Whoa, there's like a whole, I see like a whole spider web of ways to take that thought. I think, if Eckhart Tolle was listening to that, he would say that is fundamentally about ego. Because if you attach too much to your role or position in society, in life, or at work, and you are not sufficiently knowing of thyself, then you will have some challenges. Because, of course, positions come and go, right? But only yourself stays the same here. And I think inside of this doing the right thing theme, if you will, being able to accept where you are and let go of the ego and get down to the business of just striving to be better every day. Like, it's amazing, Mark, as soon as you get rid of the ego and get down to the business of self-improvement, of growth, a growth mindset, of embracing challenge and not resenting it, not doing but me, I have a challenge. Oh, it's not fair. Well, the news is life ain't fair. So you may as well bring yourself back down and start with some hard work. I mean, I really like how this juxtaposes this sort of instant success culture, everything shiny on Instagram culture, and gets us back to real life.
Yeah, that's right. There's a great quote that I found in meditations earlier, Mike, for this closing clip that it's very short. I'll just quickly read it out because I think it's talking exactly to the sentiment you're just expressing there. You may break your heart, but men will still go on as before. So what I hear from that and the way that I interpret it is life's going to get tough, but it's up to you how you react and you behave in that situation.
Yes.
Whether it's about ego and your position in maybe business or your role externally to other people, it doesn't necessarily, or it shouldn't necessarily impact how you behave. It shouldn't impact how you respond or talk to others. Instead, we should focus our energy on what's good, what's positive, what's going to, as you were calling out earlier, impact perhaps our legacy positively. Yeah. Impact the way that we live our lives so that we don't regret. Yeah. But also we can put a smile on other people's faces. What a wonderful power we all have because we can all influence others so positively if we choose to. Yes. And I think for me, that story about Ulysses Grant is calling out his resistance to letting his ego get in the way of taking care of his family, taking care of his friends, but also just living a slightly more positive life.
And I think the key word of this show is, and you just said it, choose. You have to choose. And then if you've said, okay, I want to choose to do the right thing, then you got to work on it. And you got to go through all of the permutations that we've talked about that come from this book. So much homework to do. Where does yours begin, Mark?
There's a lot in the right thing right now. I think we've really delved, Mike, into the back catalogs here with Ryan Holiday.
So if you were going to nominate just one item for your special attention, which one is that?
I think it's actually this concept where we can carve out our own future. No one is born a saint. Likewise, and I think you said this prior to recording, actually, if no one is born a saint, no one is born a devil.
Right.
So instead, we can influence and control our trajectory and how we behave in our world. So for me, Mike, my homework is striving to be better, to be generous, to be a good version of myself that I think will hopefully impact others in a positive way. What about you, Mike? A lot to unpack and a lot to learn from and journal about in this book, but what's really standing out to you is a little bit of homework.
Well, you do mention journaling, and I thought it was quite revealing the breadth of work I felt I could do, particularly on preparing myself for whatever future events life holds. Do you remember I was doing that exercise where it's like, okay, so what have you struggled with and how would you address it? Like, man, I've never done that as a journaling exercise in years. So
I'm scribbling that one down as well, actually.
But crazy, right? Like, it just shows you how much opportunity there is to do the right thing, right?
Yeah. Life is full of opportunities, which is a blessing.
Yeah.
But also it's something where we can choose whether to do it in a positive way or a negative way.
Yeah.
And hopefully for you and I and all of our listeners, Mike, and our members, we're all doing the positive stuff.
I hope so too. So a big thank you to you, Mark, and a thank you to you, our members, our viewers, and our listeners too. Here on show, wait for this, 260, where we have studied the fifth work of Ryan Holiday on the show, Right Thing, Right Now. And there were 4 big ideas. Here's how they roll. First, be the change that you want to see. You know, every day is a chance to practice Stoic virtues. Number 2 was striving to be better, with a big emphasis on striving, because ain't nobody born a saint, so you got to work on it every single day. Number 3, what can you in fact sleep with at night? This is a big one, and this is why you should do the right thing so your legacy will be intact. And lastly, the big rally, the big crescendo to bring it home on this show is accept and let it go and really get rid of the ego and strive to be better and strive to do the right thing right now. What a show, and how totally moonshots it was. It was really a chance for us to be the very best version of ourselves, and that is absolutely spot on. Moonshot thinking. That's a wrap.